So 4 years ago, this 87 Buick Grand National was scrapped at Pull Apart Used Auto Parts. Now they're a nationwide self-service junkyard chain and receive all sorts of cars through their doors each and every day. Now fortunately, when this car was scrapped at one of the locations, the management there pulled this car aside, contacted me, brought it here to Classic G-Body Garage, and I've done a complete video series on all the steps that I took to get the car up and running and attempting to get it back on the road. Now today, I'm going to take you through the entire braking system and all the steps that I took to get this car one step closer to getting it back on the road where it belongs. Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Brian and welcome to Classic G-Body Garage and to video number 5 of the Project Scrap National build. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what this build is all about, we'll hit the link above or check out the channel for the first 4 videos regarding all the work that I've done on this car to bring us to this point. Now, in this video, as mentioned, I'm going to go through the entire braking system on this car. And in the process, I'm going to replace a major component, which is a very common swap on these late model Grand Nationals. But before I grab my tools and jump into this job, I'm going to educate you a little bit about the 4 braking systems available on a G-Body, and that'll help you understand the reason why I'm going to do a little swappage on this Grand National. Now the first brake system are the manual brakes, and these are probably most commonly found on base model G-Bodies where there is no power assist. The master cylinder is literally bolted to a plate against the firewall, and all manual brake systems use the small brake pedal just like what is used on a manual trans G-Body. The second type of system is vacuum assisted power brakes, and the most common. A large vacuum diaphragm is bolted to the firewall and the master cylinder is bolted to the diaphragm. Now this system uses the vacuum generated from the engine, and a large vacuum line runs from the booster to the back of the carb. Now the third type of brake system is hydro boost, where it gets the boost based off of hydraulic pressure. Now that hydraulic pressure is created from the power steering pump. Just like a power steering pump gives you nice easy power steering, well, it also helps create the boost for the power brakes. Now there's a series of hydraulic lines that go from the power steering pump up to a large valve system on the front of the firewall in place of where the vacuum booster would be, and the master cylinder bolts directly to that. Now a hydro boost system is found primarily on diesel G-Bodies and also the early generation Buick Grand Nationals up to about 84. Now 85, 86, and 87 Buick Grand Nationals, they have a Power Master system, which is an electronic brake system where a large electric motor spins and creates that boost for the power assist. Now a common issue with these Power Masters is the electric motor seizes up, goes bad, and you completely lose your brakes altogether. And that's exactly what happened to the Scrap National. So what I'm going to do is do a swap from the Power Master over to a vacuum assisted brake system, which is a common swap to do on these Power Master cars. So let me grab my tools, and we'll get this thing torn off of here. Alright, so the Power Master system is secured to the firewall just like any G-Body brake system with 4 studs that run through the firewall and nuts on the back side. Now to remove these nuts, you need to remove this lower vent panel, and while you're under there, you also need to disconnect the brake pedal from the push arm by pulling the clip off. Now this system has electrical connectors that need to be moved out of the way. We have the main wiring harness that runs under it and the speedo cable that runs above it. So I might have to reroute some of that stuff, or at least get them to fit around the big brake booster diaphragm that'll end up in this car. Now it looks like on the back side here, there's a plate with 4 studs the Power Master bolts to that stick through the firewall just like any other G-Body. We do have the typical 2 brake lines for the front and the back, and an electrical connector on the bottom for the motor, and the top here that I believe is the pressure sensor. So let me grab my tools and get this behemoth out of here. All right, I finally got this thing released from the brake pedal underneath the dashboard. That was a big job. And let's see if this thing comes out now. Oh, speedometer cable's in the way. Fish this thing through. Come on out. Now what are you stuck on? Dipstick. There it is. This thing's a beast and it's heavy. Really heavy. The next step is to remove this brake pedal assembly, which is held on with 5 bolts. So you have the 4, one here. There's a clip on the nut that holds this wiring harness. So got to remove the clip, which will give me access to the bolt. Then the harness comes around here, which also covers another bolt. So once I remove that clip, hopefully this harness I can pull it out of the way and I'll get access to those 2 bottom bolts. And then there are 2 others. There's one right there, way up there. And I think they're 15 millimeter. And then the other one right there. So there's those 2, which you can see them. So there's the 4 right there, and you can remove that plate on the front side of the firewall. But then there is a 5th one, which is way above the steering column, which I'm not sure I'll be able to get to unless I drop the column down itself, and the column is held on by a bolt there and a bolt there. So once I get those 4 out that I can somewhat access, I'll see if I can get to that 5th one, which is a 13 millimeter way up there above the column. And I can get this brake pedal assembly out because it's different than a power or a vacuum boost pedal. All right, I got all 4 bolts out, and this thing should pry right out of here. It looks like it's sealed pretty good though. Got a foam gasket down here. See if I can get a screwdriver in here and kind of pry it loose. All right, there it is. This is the plate that sticks through the firewall, obviously, and the 4 studs hold the brake pedal in. I'm not sure if this almost looks like it's larger than it usually is. It kind of looks hacked up right there, like the factory kind of cuts it out a little bit larger. But I'm guessing this hole right here is the same size, or at least these studs are the same as any other brake booster, but I'm going to do some measuring, a little bit of research, but here you go, the plate's out. All right, I have everything sitting here on the bench. That was a pretty big job, a little bit more than I thought it would be to pull this entire system out, but really the biggest part, or the biggest headache, was maneuvering the brake pedal and also the Power Master around those wires, around the cables. So once you get all that out of place, it kind of comes apart fairly easily. So everything's sitting here on the bench, and let me grab the Power Master so you all can get a good look at this monster. This thing is really heavy. I would say it's about 15 pounds if I were to guess. So this is your electronic brake system in an 85, 86, and 87 Grand National. The earlier years had a hydro boost system that runs off the power steering pump, but this thing is all electric. This is the electric motor here on the bottom. Almost looks like the size of a starter motor, honestly, without the solenoid on the side of it. And there's a brake line connected to the front of the motor. So when you hit the brake pedal, this motor spins, generates pressure, brings fluid, brake fluid. You can see how big this reservoir is, it's huge. Brings brake fluid around, pumps it back into the master cylinder, and creates pressure within the system to help the brake pedal go up and down. Gives you that power assist, kind of like a vacuum boost system generated off of the vacuum of the motor. This accumulator ball also helps store some of the pressure that's built up in the system. So a couple things can go wrong with these systems. These electric motors, they seize up over time, which is the case with this one, because when I got the car and I had the key forward, every time I would go to start the car, I have the key forward, the thing would constantly click and click and click, and I couldn't figure out what the hell was wrong with it. So I just unplugged it right here, and that fixed the problem. So motor's bad, it's seized up. These accumulator balls also go bad as well, and of course the master cylinder itself can go bad. So a lot can go bad with these things. They can be very costly, or they are very costly to have rebuilt. Good luck finding someone who can rebuild them, and good luck finding parts as well. So that's the end of this thing. I'm not going to deal with it, and in a box it goes to whoever else wants it and rebuild it for their own Grand National. So I'm going to convert over to a vacuum boost system. Actually, let me grab this thing once again. My God, this thing's heavy. You can see the 4 studs on the back of it that go through the firewall. Same as any other G-body, which are the 4 studs on the back of the brake booster right here. So this booster will go right back in place. Make sure you pull the booster off of a G-body so you know it works. You can't, to my knowledge, you can't use it off any other vehicle. I think G-bodies might be specific, but who knows. Oops. That's the little push pin there. So make sure you get a booster off of a G-body, and also you make sure you get a brake pedal from a boosted system, because the brake pedal on the Power Master system is in fact different. The leverage pin, the little pivot pin that is right here, which is where the arm goes through the firewall, connects to the brake pedal, is at a different location than on a Power Master pedal. The Power Master pedal, the pin is higher. The pin on a standard brake system is lower, so the leverage point is slightly different. So if you don't change out this brake pedal, that arm or that rod that comes through the firewall for the diaphragm won't match up to your brake pedal. So you either need to change out the brake pedal itself or the entire bracket with brake pedal, which I'm going to do. I pulled this out of a Monte Carlo with standard boosted system, which this came from. So that is it. I got a brand new AC Delco master cylinder. Let's pull this thing out of the bag, or out of the box. Brand new master cylinder, AC Delco. I like buying AC Delco parts for my cars. And this thing is aluminum, just like the factory. So real nice looking part right here. AC Delco master cylinder and reservoir, which will go on the front. Right there, which will go on the front of the booster, and it'll look just like a standard boosted braking system. So you do have to connect the vacuum up to the engine, which I'll get to that here in a little bit, but let me grab this brake pedal and start reassembling. All right, here we go. I should have a new gasket on here, but instead I just put a thin layer of RTV just because I do not have a gasket. And I want to get this car done. RTV will be just fine. Get in there. All right, booster's in place, obviously. Harness is out of the way. Runs underneath there nicely. And I should be able to then run this back underneath here and hook the speedo cable back up. So we'll leave that loose for now. This seems to be relatively in place. So now I'll go back onto the dashboard, dropping tools. I'll go back under the dashboard and put those 4 nuts on the back side of this thing and hook up the push rod. All right, the brake booster is on, everything's tight. Everything under the dashboard is good and tight. At least I will double check that. And ready to put on the master cylinder. Brand new. Don't forget the push pin, which drops right in place. Master cylinder simply drops right in place. Put the nuts on it. Just like any other G-body. All right, so the brake lines are on, everything's looking good. Bent them up just a bit, and everything looks factory. So now I'm gonna go ahead and remove the lines and hook up my little homemade brake bleeding system so I can get this master cylinder bled. You know, you can bleed these master cylinders on the bench or on the car. I prefer to do it on the car just because it's kind of easier than sticking the master cylinder in a vise and then pushing the end of it with the screwdriver or one of those brake bleeding plungers. It's easier just to put it on the car. And you can just hook up your little bleeder lines and push the pedal with your foot. Brand new. Almost don't even want to put fluid in there. Alright, so this here is my homemade brake bleeder system. Literally just have a couple of old brake lines and I have brass fittings down the end here so I can fit them into these holes here. I probably could have just taken old lines coming off the master cylinders, the master cylinder here. You know, these are two different size fittings, front and back, so I have these adapters on here. It's just easier for me to position them wherever and then dump the tube in there. So get these hooked up. So the goal here is that you want to get this brake fluid circulated through the master cylinder only. That's why you don't want to hook up the brake lines. You get it circulated and you're literally going to pump all the air out of the master itself. Once all the air is out of it, then you hook up the brake lines, then you bleed the rest of the system. So the whole purpose of this is you make sure that these lines are submerged in the fluid completely, and as you you fill it with fluid, and as you push the brake pedal, bubbles will come up to the surface, and then you keep on pumping it until you see constant flow of brake fluid in these lines. That's why these lines are clear. I want to make sure that there is no air left in this master cylinder. And you'll like this. Just literally have clothespins to hold them in place. That's all you need. Alright, ready to bleed the brakes. Got the kit in place. Clothespins are making sure the lines are submerged and fluid is topped off. So you can see the bubbles just coming out on its own right now just because there's air in these lines, and it might start to siphon it through a little bit on its own, but I'm going to go inside the car, give it a few pumps, and then you'll be able to start seeing the fluid come through these lines. Make sure you don't have any leaks down here, because if you do, it's just going to continue to draw air into these lines and into the master cylinder as well. So I want to make sure those lines are good and tight. So I'm going to jump in the car, start hitting the pedal, and see if you can see any bubbles come through. So as you push the pedal down all the way to the floor, just do it real slow. And then release it slowly. Just keep cycling it. You can see all those air bubbles coming through. And as soon as you stop seeing those air bubbles coming through like that, and you see a constant flow of brake fluid as you push the pedal down and back up and down again, then your master cylinder is bled. Alright, after about 20 cycles of the pedal, you didn't see any more bubbles popping through here. A constant flow of brake fluid, so the master cylinder is good and bled. So now the next step is to remove these two bleeder lines and get the regular brake lines hooked back up, and of course there's going to be lines or air in the lines. So then you go ahead, jack the car up, and bleed the system as you normally would. Alright, so the final step in converting this over to a vacuum assisted power brake system, you need the actual vacuum source. The hole right there in the side of the diaphragm is where the vacuum source goes to. And on standard G bodies or non-Grand Nationals or non-turbo G bodies, that is runs over to the engine and plugs into the intake manifold or the back of the carburetor, wherever the maximum vacuum is. Now on this car, the maximum vacuum is coming off the throttle body right here, and on the top of turbo Regals, you have this vacuum block. There's a bunch of lines coming off here for all the vacuum sources for the engine, and there are a couple ways to do this. Some people will tee it off of this one right here because it's the largest port, or you can swap out the vacuum block itself, which I did here, that has the additional port coming off the side for this conversion. So what I'll do is just run a vacuum line coming off of this, run it around the back, and then over to here. And then one thing that you do want to add in here is this valve. It's a check valve. It's found on any G-body with vacuum assisted brakes, and what this check valve does is it prevents vacuum loss when you shut the car off. So vacuum is still maintained inside the booster when the engine is off. Just, you know, maintains a little bit of vacuum in there in case, you know, you need to hit the brakes when the car is off. It still gives you that assistance. So let me go ahead and grab some vacuum line, which I have here, this big roll of line. I'll cut it down to size and get everything hooked up. All right, everything is all wrapped up. Brake fluid is topped off. The reservoir cap should be nice and tight. I checked that there were no leaks underneath after bleeding the entire system, so we're all good there. And then I finished up running the main vacuum line off of the vacuum block right here. Here's the T coming off the block. Ran the line next to the throttle plate. There's a little area on the throttle plate. I could run a zip tie around it to keep that vacuum line still and out of the way of the cables. Definitely don't want that. Ran it down underneath the spark plug wires to the back here. Have a T coming up to the one-way valve right here, and then up to the booster itself. So now the time has come to fire this thing up. Make sure that the brake light is off on the dashboard. Make sure the brake pedal feels firm once the car is running, and also find out if I have any vacuum leaks. What I'm also going to do, let me fire it up, is I'm going to make sure the car stays in one spot. Fires up pretty easy. It hasn't been running in about a week. The sun's in the way. But the brake light is off on the dashboard. There are no lights at all on the dashboard. So that's a good thing. Brake pedal. Brake pedal's nice and firm. You hit it a bunch of times and it doesn't want to stall the motor due to vacuum loss. So now what I'm going to do, put my foot on the brake, put it in gear. You can hear the motor drop. So far the brakes are holding the wheels from spinning. No loss of pressure, no lights on the dashboard. Pop it back in neutral. Sounds good. Shut it off. All right, so things are good. You know, back in 2017 when I pulled this car into the garage, or I should say limped it into the garage, I about put it through the far wall because this Power Master, when it failed, it failed. There was nothing left as far as the brakes go, and I would imagine that that is probably the same case with most any other Power Master system when they fail. So if you have yourself a Turbo Regal and it has the Power Master system, I highly encourage you on upgrading it to Hydro Boost or a vacuum boosted system like this one. So since the car was back on the ground, I fired it back up, I put it in gear, the car stays in one spot, so I think everything is good with the brake system. So we know the car runs good, according to the last video. We know the car stays in one spot when the brakes are on. So we're all good, at least in the garage. So the next step is gonna get the car back on the road. Now this is gonna be the first time I've ever driven the car. You know, I've kind of limped it around the driveway here and there. I never officially flat out drove the car. The car never even made it out of first gear, so I have no idea if the transmission is good in this car. So coming up on video number 6, and it'll probably be the last video of Project Scrap National, is getting this car on the road. So I'm super excited. I was gonna include it in this video, but I think it should be a video all on its own. So, runs, brakes in the garage. Let's find out if it drives down the road. Let's find out if the transmission shifts, if it gets up to speed, if it cruises at 35 miles an hour or whatever it does, if it burns the tires. All coming up in video number 6, guys. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and follow along on Classic G-Body Garage on both Instagram and Facebook. And until the next Classic G-Body Garage video, make sure you keep those G-Bodies rolling.